doing, and I hope you're all keeping well. This it will be kind of a dark video, but it also, like anything else in life, how you approach it is really how you will deal with it. Now, as I know, this video is addressed to the tribe as a whole and the tribes and people that are tribe minded. We have a lot less to worry about than what this video is about, by virtue of the fact that we didn't take the transubstantiation of the sacred needlecraft. But it's happening now. It's over. It's coming to an end. Western civilization is literally falling apart. The the airport chaos is. You think about airports and you think about the world of aviation, commercial aviation, and flying. It really is the glue that bonds all the other countries together. It is the touch point, really, where I suppose people, the commercial world, the bureaucratic world, the everyday world, the average person. It's really airports and airport terminals is really a tremendous place to measure the psychic weather of the world. It's what happens in the airport terminals is indicative of the health, the overall health of the society. So, for instance, if you live in a country where you have chaos in a single airport, well, that's would tell you there's something seriously dysfunctional with that country, because the airport, it has to abide by sort of integrated sum totals of its parts. They're both bureaucratic, administrative, governmental, safety, security, commercial. It all has to glue into a seamless whole. In fact, as an actual organism, an airport is an incredibly impressive thing when you think of all the different elements that go to make an airport be an airport, right? Now, if you would say, if one country, you could always kind of tell when a country was going into chaos or in a bad state by the state of their airports. When you traveled around Europe or North America, you saw these beautiful airports that we had, and how these incredibly complex machines of human life, for the most part, work seamlessly. There was not, just by sheer virtue of statistical anomalies, there would be things would go wrong. But on the whole, if you think of, like, say, what it takes to have a big airport function, it's stunning. And remember, all the transport links go into it, and exports, imports. So if you arrived in a country and the airport was a mess, it was a sign that the country was a mess. There was a sign that something wasn't right in the country. And usually there was a breakdown in the things that caused that to happen. Well, now we have a situation where the entire Western world's aviation, commercial, airport, air travel industry is now in a state of chaos. And that tells us that the things are falling apart in society. And they're falling apart because people, there's a couple of reasons. The lower end ones is that the lockdowns basically destroyed supply chains and wrecked the economic stability of the West. Absolutely, there's no doubt about that. Wrecked it. And the reason why it wrecked it is because bureaucrats and politicians took over the running of things that they're not competent enough to take control of. You know how I've been talking about for years that the greatest problem with the Western civilization today is that the ones at the top are all incredibly mediocre. So you had all these incredibly mediocre people, from Baby Castro in Canada to Jacinta Ardern to Dan Andrews to everyone in the British and Irish government, to Biden, to everybody, Biden's entire cabinet, all incredibly mediocre people who were put in charge of something that they were destined to destroy. and that was the stewardship of Western civilization during the scandemic lockdown, which we know was originally designed to bring in, this great reset, this new world. And it was never going to happen. Well, it didn't happen. It was completely, that was all destroyed in the end by Russia invading Ukraine and Russia suddenly becoming the most powerful nation in the world. But also secondary, the globalists, the likes of Klaus Schwab and all the G7 and the Bilderbergs and all the rest of them had far too much faith in their young leaders to do it properly. And because they, remember, if you're put into a position of power because you're a yes man or a yes woman, by virtue you're mediocre. You're not there by your ability to be dynamic and be creative. You're there because you said yes sir, no sir, yes madam, no madam, to the right people. So therefore it was not surprising to me that, see, the problem that the G8, the Bilderbergs, the World Economic Forum, what they shot themselves in the foot because they filled the world's governments, bureaucracies, health services, the lot, with incredibly mediocre people only capable of saying yes. They filled the universities with incredibly mediocre academics only incapable of repeating what they've been told. And as a result, when they all thought that when the lockdowns came, what they didn't bargain for was these fucking idiots were not going to be able to do it properly because they're fucking idiots. They're fucking idiots. And they showed themselves to be the kind of fucking idiots they were. I mean, if you want a classic example of fucking idiocy, look at no further than how baby Castro Trudeau in Canada broke cover and seized the bank accounts of the truck drivers. And it was even semi-sentient normies were fully aware, oh well, that's a bit much now. And it was a science fiction movie of our Chinese communist future, which all our governments have planned for us, because ultimately the likes of these globalist think tanks and the secret unknowns look directly towards China as the model of what they want for the West. Mark my words, that's what they wanted. And of course, now everything has changed and it's fallen apart. Basically, what's happening in China right now, they were hoping to do that in the West. People being starved to death slowly in apartment buildings, and this whole lie-down generation who'd given up on life, who are just waiting to die, who wouldn't breed or anything like that. Now, I know you on the other side will say, why would governments would dare kill their populations off because they need to sell products to them? Well, they're stupid too. You have to remember that. And also, they were banking on immigrants replacing the native populations and paying them lower wages. I mean, the head of the Central Bank of Ireland in 2019 openly stated that there still wasn't enough immigrants in Ireland to drive down wages. Just think about that one. And on the head of the central bank are union leaders. But you see, they were like Machine Gun Beg, the head of the unions. They only care about the public sector workers, the ones civil servants and the ones who work for the government. They don't care about anyone else. Now, Ireland is literally dying right now. It's incredible. Ireland is a nation that's dying, and it's dying, and your country's probably dying too. But I can only speak from an Irish viewpoint. Now, just like anywhere else, Dublin Airport and our main airports are absolute chaos. They're an absolute nightmare. Okay. Now, the reason for this is the same reason our courts. When you hear this one, our court services have shut down until January 2023. All courts in Ireland have been shut down until January 2023. The court buildings are closed up, the doors are locked, the keys are shut. You're now finding this at civil service offices around the country, that whole departments that are shut up and closed. This is a nation dying. And now another symbol of the breakdown of transport. A Dublin bus literally can't service the population, even though They've hired hundreds of new drivers in recent years. They're all unionized, and some of them are on £900 euros a week. Fucking huge salaries for driving a fucking bus. Now, these people are not showing up to work. There's been a couple of big concerts in Dublin, Green Day, the Red Hot Chili Peppers, and a few others, where there was no buses after the gigs to take people home. There's that many staff not coming to work now. Now, let's talk about why this is happening. I'll go off on one of my parables because I'm quite upset and I'm quite emotional right now of what has been done to the human race. So, in order to try and maintain some element of stability and decorum in my psychology right now, I should go to a parable, a story. In the 1960s, Roger Corman, the American director, made an incredible movie called The Mask of the Red Death. It starred Vincent Price and Jane Usher, and it told the story of a character called Prince Prospero and his royal courtier and his court sequestered inside an Italian castle during an outbreak of plagues that were sweeping across northern Italy at the time. I wrote about Prospero in my book, Puzzling People, Elaborate than a Psychopath. After a visit to an Italian castle I'd made years ago that showed a headboard of people dying in a plague, and it was actually a marital headboard for these aristocrats, these psychopathic aristocrats. Now, so they were conceiving their children under images of people dying of plague. So anyway, in the movie The Mask of the Red Death, Prince Prospero and his courtier and all his little cronies and little royalists and little, you know, other aristocrats are all barricaded up inside of this castle, and outside the peasants are dying of plague and starvation. And if they show up at the castle wall saying, give us some relief, Prince Prospero, help us," they get met with the what you call the crossbow bolt. And Prospero is a cruel, vicious occultist as well, who serves the devil, serves his lord Satan, whatever. Jane Asher plays a local peasant girl who's been taken in to be basically an MK Ultra type thing of her day. And inside this castle, Roger Corman perfectly shows the aristocrats and what they do. And this included pedophilia. Pedophilia is graphically shown in the movie, but not with using kids. And we have no sophistication and elegance anymore. Nowadays we have Desmond is amazing shoved in our faces. But in the 1960s, Roger Corman used two dwarfs, a male and a female married couple dwarfs, as symbolic of the pedophiles, of children who are pedophile sex slaves to the aristocrats. And there's the scene where it's done, you show, I remember watching this film about 10 years, 15 years ago with my mother, and we were watching on TV in their house, in my parents' house. And she was saying, "Oh, I love this film when it first came out. I love Vincent Price and all this stuff, blah, blah, blah." And I was saying, "Oh, it's a great film. I'm looking forward to this." And we're watching it. And the scene begins, the scene shows one of Prospero's cronies, another aristocrat, looking at the midget girl, the dwarf girl, and going, "Can you only imagine the possibilities?" And Vincent Price as Prince Prospero goes, "I'm aware of your tastes," whatever his name was. And my mother turned around and said, "We watched this film as kids, as teenagers. We didn't realize that this guy is really a pedophile. It's not about a midget, it's about a child." And I was like, well, that was the sophistication of movies back then. A director like Roger Corman could create a movie where he could convey the depravity of the aristocrats in a form of what's the word? Substituted reality. In this case, a midget woman compensating for the reality of what the guy was really talking about, a prepubescent girl. So anyway, the film is in there, and the film also contains these death-like figures, these shrouded figures who are it's a beautifully made film, by the way, and they meet up at the beginning, and they talk. Tonight I passed through Verona, I passed through Florence. Many slept and never awoke where I walked tonight. And the other one says, and I've come down from Milan through Turin, and then all the way down through Umbria and this night, and many have slept and will never wake. And this kind of thing, this kind of like poetic gothic horror of these fantastic 60s films with Vincent Price in them. It was just talk about a star, And so go watch that film tonight if you haven't seen it, and tell me it's not about now. And what it is the aristocrats in their castle who are not really safe from at the very I won't explain the end of the film what happens, but it is time for a new dance, the dance of death, and that's you can see the film, you watch the film yourself. But anyway, the whole film. I see it personally as an allegory for the last 2.5 years. The people inside Prospero's castle were the ones who abided by all the government restrictions, who did everything they were told to do. And the peasants on the outside were us, the tribes, who didn't take the needlecraft. And the scene where they say, Prospero, help us, and he has them killed. Well, that was us saying, can we have our freedom back? We don't want to take the needlecraft. We don't want restrictions. We want our freedom back. And they all mocked and laughed as they killed them inside it. And these were the ones who, if you came onto the comments pages of news stories on the Rona, or it came into message boards and said things like, have you looked at the Lancet? The Lancet actually says masks are dangerous. The Lancet says the needlecraft is extremely dangerous. Ha ha, how are you, Jimmy? How are you done? Ah, fucking Egypt. Ah, those types, you fucking Egypt. Conspiracy theorists, get the fuck out of here. Ah, those types. Right, them types. They were the ones in the castle mocking us. But in the end, they did the dance of death. And the film is a fantastic allegory of what's going on. What you're seeing in Dublin Airport and other airports, where these people are humiliating themselves, these normies are humiliating themselves by standing online. Now, I've genuine sympathy for people who have to go to work, have to fly to work, or have to visit someone out of a genuine need. I'm talking about the average normie who's now compelled to go on a foreign holiday and doesn't really understand why. The 2 weeks in Benidorm, the 2 weeks in Playa de Ingles, the 2 weeks in Faro, those types. This is their dance of death. They know this is probably their last ever holiday because they're dying. And that's why the government is now bringing the army in to operate the airports. And I'll tell you what, and everyone says, we have been able to get back to normal since the lockdown. To imply it's a private company and staff were laid off. No, everyone who worked in that airport, I'm talking about the baggage handlers and all those types, security people, they're all unionized. They're all in jobs for life. They can't get fired, okay? They're not coming up to work because they're fucking dead. Or they're at home dying. What from? The fucking needlecraft. It became a symbol of left-wing minded people, civil servants, bureaucrats, government workers, trade unionists, to take the needlecraft as a symbolic gesture of your devotion to the state. Okay? They're fucking dead. The bus drivers in Dublin bus who are not showing up are fucking dead. The courts are shut down until January because the administrative backstaff in the civil service, the bureaucrats, the clerical workers, all the admin workers, half of them are fucking dead. Do you understand? They're dying because of the fucking needlecraft. And if they're not dying, they're fucking incredibly ill. They have blood disorders and everything. In Germany, in in Germany, they had this, one of my friends showed a report there showing that huge numbers of young Germans are having to get dialysis, blood cleansing, because of the effects of the needlecraft. And they've been basically told that, they're being told that they're looking for help, saying this stuff is destroying my body. And they're saying they're being called anti-vaxxers. Why? Because no one dares. You know the way Oscar Wilde talked about homosexuality, the love that dare not speak its name. Well, with the Rona deaths, the people dying from the fucking needlecraft is the death that no one speaks its name. They're fucking dying. Someone I know, another person I know, died who worked in a shop locally yesterday. I have never had a period in my life where I've been surrounded by so much debt. And that's not just me inventing this off the scale. You go and you look at every fucking statistical office of every Western nation that had the needlecraft program. And as soon as the needlecraft was implemented, all across the board, people are dying in colossal rates. Also, fertility rates have collapsed in these same countries. Do I think that that was deliberately done by the powers that be? No, I don't. I don't think they wanted to genocide the people. I think they really did believe that this fucking thing would work. And this thing was actually, but it was what their plan was. Here's my belief. Here's my belief of the whole scamdemic. In order to get the population living on these injections and seeing them with unbridled faith and unbridled devotion, where you had to take one of these injections as a all the time. You needed them. Just you thought they were the most wonderful thing ever. They were to replace your natural immune system, right? I think that the likes of Gates and the rest of them honestly believed that this thing was going to happen. And the ruse was, as soon as they got a seasonal virus that was a little bit nastier than usual, they would launch this miracle product of the needlecraft. And then everyone would get suddenly better. And then they would say, look how the magic of the needlecraft gave you your life back. And this is what all the psychological things about the lockdowns, the burlesquing with the masks, the burlesquing with the mass transformation psychosis. This was all about profits for big pharma. And also control for governments, because they have the population believe they could not function from womb to tomb without constant needlecrafts. And because we're dealing with mediocrity on every level, from the actual people who develop the needlecraft to the big pharma companies to all the other checks and balances and safety things that were ignored, they rolled the dice and expected everyone to get suddenly better. And they say, the miracle of Bill Gates' needlecraft, the miracle of the foghorn leghorn, the miracle of the Jabberwocky. You're all better and you're all got your lives back and are free. Now you know you have to take this stuff forever. And then the shareholders of like Pfizer and the rest of them go through the roof, okay? But what happened was what they didn't expect. It's killing people. It's maiming people. It's destroying people. And they did not expect this. And this is why health board executives all over the world are suddenly resigning and making a run for it. Because they have seen the writing is on the wall. They are trying to get out of Prospero's castle before this arrives upon them. They're trying to get out of Prospero's. They were inside there with Prospero laughing at us, hoping we would die. The people who made fun of us, saying, "Oh, well, enjoy your ventilator." Or the people who said, "You will die." Or when somebody died, they have these stories in the media, propaganda, terror tactic stories of somebody who was who she said it was an anti Jabberwocky and died. So, on their deathbed, they said, "I wish I hadn't taken it." You know, these types, and they laughed at them. They're the ones dying now. They're the ones that the dance of death has arrived. The ones who are standing in queue for 7 hours at airports to get to do their last 2 weeks of life in Benidorm. The pirouette of putrefaction. It's happening. This is our societies are collapsing right now, and they're collapsing because the ones most, and it makes perfect sense why public services are the first to go. The civil servants, the government workers, the hospital worker, the union workers. These are the ones who most devoted to the state, and they're the ones who think that you have to do everything the state tells you, and they're all the ones who were the first ones to roll their sleeves up. I also don't believe the numbers, the 96 or 95% take up on the needlecraft happened in Ireland because the government is trying to give away 4.6 million doses to another country for free that they paid for. We paid for, by the way, and they can't get rid of them. So there's these numbers of people they're saying that took up the needlecraft are not as high as they are. I would reckon that maybe up to maybe 40% of the population in most Western nations said no. They just didn't make a song and dance about it, but they didn't do it. They what they had they held. They just said let's hang out, let's see what happens. But meanwhile, in the public sector, now flying is also a big issue. Nearly all those pilots are needlecraft. It's only a matter of time before planes will be falling out of the sky. Or they probably won't even. Now that's probably too dramatic. It won't happen. They'll have. What will happen is what's being reported in airports all over the world. People have put their baggage on the carousel. They've gone through security. They're waiting at the gate. They see the plane coming in to take them to Faro or whatever. The stuff comes off the plane, and then suddenly they're told the flight's cancelled. Why? Because the pilot is in the hospital trying to remove a blood clot, or one of the staff. It's a time bomb, that is. And you can say things like, "Oh, this is what they want. They don't want us flying." No, I now truly believe their incompetence has come. Yes, they did want us flying less and everything, but they did not want this catastrophe. The fact that the Irish government Ireland is basically. Christian Morris said this to me this morning, and I didn't believe him at first. Well, I didn't believe him. I didn't agree at first. But now I'm starting to think there's something to it, that Ireland is now falling under martial law. And I'll give you an example. The army now having to run the airports because the airport staff, who are all left-wing socialists, union types, all took the transubstantiation of sacred needlecraft to prove that they weren't far right, far right, because they all would have said, remember the whole socialist network, and I mean the whole liberal left wing thing was that people who are refusing the needlecraft are far right extremists, and you can't separate racism from refusal of the Jabberwocky. And those assholes would have went out and got deliberately injected, just like the ones in America who got deliberately ran up and got as many doses as possible to prove they weren't Trump supporters. These are the ones that are dying. These are the ones in the journal.ie comment section who were laughing at everybody, mocking. Remember those? Do you remember at the height of it, the mocking and the ridicule? If you dared to say, "Hold on a second, there is evidence that this thing doesn't work. It's in the Lancet. It's in Johns Hopkins University's own research report." Get out of here, you fucking fucking right-wing fascist, anti-fucking needlecraft wanker. This kind of fucking need you fucking loser. Well, those punts are all said that are all dying now. They're all dying now. They're all dying. You will do not deny it. There's no hope. It's over. And I'm not being hysterical, and I don't want it to happen. I feel, I mean, I'm hearing stories of people who work as natural health practitioners and work in regular healthcare that are terrifying. One of the recent stories I've heard is that in the old people's homes, they're giving the elderly their number four now. The boy, I say boy, and the elderly are rocking back like this, scratching their arms when the injection happened. It's like a fucking horror film. And we have these animals. Now remember, the Minister for Health here was elected on the 15th count, and yet he was in charge of the biggest public crisis since World War II. A guy who was elected on the 15th count, and another guy who didn't even understand how virology naming protocols work. And it's the same in your country, and it's not just Ireland, it's everywhere. The biggest morons are in government. Mediocrity has been put into the central position. Now, let's take this to another psychological level. Why this year did so many Irish parents, and I'm sure it happened in your country too, bring their very young children to pride parades and have them waving flags at pride parades, and then go online saying, I'm raising my son to be tolerant, love is love, you know, these types, right? Uh, when a child shouldn't even, at that young, shouldn't even be to know about these kinds of things. You know, they wait until they're 12 or 13. The reason for that is, I suspect that they're burlesquing their own children that they've murdered. Now, there's a very deep thing, right? If it, you know, these parents are giving the shots to their own kids. So potentially, if you're a decent parent, right, you're going, Jesus Christ, have I really done this? Have I really put that fucking thing in my child? Oh my God, right? Right, my heart those people. It really does. These are decent people who just were bullied by the endless propaganda, the police Jerusalem dancing, the TikTok dancers, right? And then put in the states of, you'll never have your life back again unless you do this. You'll never have your life back again unless you do this. And they were just tortured and psychologically terrorism. Psychological. There's no other way to describe the mainstream media, and particularly state TV stations like RTE in Ireland and the BBC in England. There's no other way to, and RAI in Italy, there's no other way to describe how they behaved in 2020 and 2021 than outright fucking psychological fucking terrorism. The Late Late Show here in Ireland, psychological terrorism. Fucking Claiborne, psychological terrorism. It was non-stop psychological terrorism to get the fucking population to inject themselves with a fucking experimental drug. And now the loaded fucking dice has crapped out. And people who tried to say, well, hold on a second, is this really, are we rushing into something? What is it really that bad? And yet we find out that the mortality rates during the so-called pandemic were lower than they usually were. It was mostly elderly people dying of the fucking Rona. And what's happening now? That's happening now. The Holocaust is happening now. It's fucking happening now, not because of the virus, but because of the incompetence of mediocre people in government, in mainstream media, in bureaucracy, in the civil service, in the healthcare sector, in the academic world. Mediocre fools who've been put into positions because they're only capable of repeating exactly what they were told. And they have unleashed a horror upon humanity. And I'm supposed to sit here and accept that I'm a fucking idiot who doesn't know anything about science. I'm supposed to deny that large numbers of my neighbours and people I know are dead now that were alive in 2019. I'm supposed to ignore the fact that when I look on eBay, I'm seeing more and more estate auctions and things being sold off at incredibly cheap prices because so many people are dying and their sites are being sold off and their contents are being sold off. I'm supposed to ignore that official government numbers show that fertility rates have collapsed in the West. I'm supposed to ignore that large numbers of babies are being born in Australia with no immune system. And it's all official stats and reports. It's not someone with a fucking crystal ball or a fucking pyramid made of fucking organite who imagined this. These are their own numbers. Just like their own stats from John Hopkins and the Lancet said, be careful with that needlecraft. But you chose to ignore it. So those people who took their children and put them in burlesque, they were burlesquing their own child as the dance of death. Subconsciously, they were burlesquing their own child. And I would guarantee you that every single parent who brought their prepubescent child and marched him in those parade things had also had made sure that those children were fully needlecrafted. It's a subconscious dance of death, a pirouette of putrefaction, a burlesque of the damned. And that's also what's happening, these enormous queues in the airport. They are burlesquings of the damned. They know it's over. That's why the reaction you saw, that's why you had George Takei, the liberal, turn around and call Justice Clarence Thomas a blackface. They're showing their true colours now. When someone drinks and gets drunk, and you say, okay, the real feelings come out, whether they're a loving person or they'll have a grievance against you. They're slurring their words, going, "You were always a fucking idiot, weren't you?" Those types. Well, that was George Takei showing what the liberals really are below their whole love diversity and all this thing. They're only interested in slewing babies, and they will. George Takei only wants to kill unborn children, and he's willing to bring back Jim Crow laws and race and slavery in America in order to get it. And that's what he meant by that comment of calling Clarence Thomas a blackface. On camera, he did it. It's just like the great Malcolm X said. The conservative is honest about his prejudice and his bigotry. The liberal is the smiling fox who's much, much worse because he's hiding his even greater hatreds of people behind his smile and his altruism. And we've seen that in spades. And what we saw outside the Supreme Court, what's going down in America is the end of society. You have situations now where they're attacking churches and burning them down. You'd have to go to pre-revolutionary France or the Bolsheviks in 1917 to see what's going on in America. It's happening here in Ireland, but in a different way. It's happening in your country in your own different way. We don't have the schism between left and right in Ireland. Ireland is generally, even when we were conservative, pretty open-minded in terms of we didn't, gay people were left alone. We have the Prime Minister of Ireland marching in the gay parade, Pride Parade, saying that that homophobic attacks are at their worst ever. Firstly, they're not, but secondly, the reason why they're happening is because he's flooded the country with people of a certain religious faith who behead people who are gay. And that's happened here. But we're not allowed to say that. No. It's fellas like me are going out and, what happens is when a jihadist cuts the head off two gay men, it's somehow my fault. And that's exactly what it was done like. And I'm sorry, if you gay people are sacrificing yourself to that, well, there you go. That's what you will reap. That is what you're reaping. Until you wake the fuck up and realize that we all have the common enemy. And the common enemy is the mediocre bureaucrat, CEO, academic, civil servant, civil rights activist, these mediocre fools with no intelligence and no sense and completely incompetent and have this idea of a perfect world and how it's to be achieved. And all they've done is created an ocean of debt. The pebble that was dropped into the lake has become a tsunami of slaughter. And it's all directly a result of fucking morons in positions of power. So, and also fucking morons on your street. What kind of fucking parent, other than someone who's been terrorized and psychologically put, willingly injects their child with something like that? What kind of person puts an experimental jab inside themselves because the kids wanted to go to Disneyland? The reason why the queues are at, let me get here, here's the 6 o'clock news Ireland. Chaos in Irish airports continue because baggage handling and security staff are dead. Courts in Ireland are closed until January 2023 because clerical and backroom staff and all levels of the administrative functioning of the court services, many of them are dead. That's what's really going on. That's what's really going on. A pharmacological holocaust. I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm hysterical about this. I hope I'm calling this incorrectly and it doesn't actually happen and everyone is fine. But it's the one thing in myself I don't have enough confidence in myself to believe. Prepare yourself for what's coming. It will be a rebirth. It will be a change in the world, but it won't be the ones that the Great Reset types were expecting. It's just what it is. You've lived to see these times, and maybe we've all manifested for this reason. But here we are. Here we are. In 2025, I reckon this world will be unrecognizable to what we have even right now.